Okay, hi everyone. How's it going? I was trying to doing a little new intro to get things going. Didn't quite work the way I wanted it to, but we'll continue to work on that. We're here in Colorado um, with this week's guest. I'm going to introduce her now. This is let's see. I got to go up here. Cynthia Swanson. Hi, Cynthia. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Hi, Randy.
Cynthia, another Colorado author. I believe you still live here in the Denver area, right?
I do. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And we met at Left Coast Crime. We were on a panel talking about crime in Colorado,
Yep.
which was an interesting panel because they didn't really give us a whole lot of guidance. They just gave us a name to the panel, and we had to just figure out from there what to do. So
It was very freeform. It was a lot of fun.
it was a lot of fun. Got to talk about the good and bad of Colorado, the crime,
Hmm.
and why we like Colorado to write books. But
Hmm. Hmm.
it was a lot of fun. Did you enjoy Left Coast Crime?
I loved it. It was great. It was my second Left Coast Crime. I went to Seattle last year because knowing it was going to be in Denver this year, I wanted to go to one before the Denver one. So I went up to Seattle last year and had a great time. And so I was looking forward for a whole year to Denver, and it was worth it. It was so much fun. Great time. So yeah.
Was it the same time of year they held it in Seattle?
Yeah, it wasn't exactly the same week. I think it was like the first or second week in April, but it's springtime. I think they try to work it wherever they can get the hotel at a reasonable time, or something like that. But I
Yeah,
think it
Seattle would be a beautiful place as long as the weather was good. And
wasn't too bad. Yeah, it was pretty. A lot of flowers. Yeah.
and were you pretty exhausted after the event?
I'm always exhausted after those events. Like I just, like I even for this one for Denver, I didn't stay at the hotel. I stayed at my house because I live in Denver, and so I was able to come home every night. And I just like came home and collapsed and didn't talk to my husband, and just like I'm done. But tomorrow I'll be back. So
I've been socializing enough all day. I don't need to talk.
totally, yeah, totally, yeah. He knows that. He knows that about me. If I'm off doing one of those kinds of things, it's that writer introvert thing where like you can be extroverted for only a certain amount of time, and then you're kind of done. So
Well, we live in Westminster, and we decided to stay at the hotel because I really didn't want to drive back and forth because
yeah,
it's
that's
such
a
long
whole.
days
Yeah,
and dealing with downtown parking and
right. Yeah, that's a
everything
whole.
else. So our daughter just dropped us off at the hotel, and she lives with us at the house, and then
Nice.
we just dealt with the downtown. We didn't realize there was so much construction going on down there.
Yes, there's a ton of stuff going on around the 16th Street Mall. They're supposed to be done with that pretty soon, so I hope that actually ends up being
Going
pretty.
on for a while, from what I heard them say,
Yeah,
for a couple of years now. It's like
yeah, yeah,
taking forever. I don't know what they're doing. They got it all torn up in spots and all
yeah,
that. So,
yeah, yeah.
but all the fun. So, but anyway, welcome. Appreciate you on. Tell us a little about yourself. All the important stuff that people need to know about you.
Okay, so I'm the author of 3 standalone psychological suspense novels: The Bookseller, The Glass Forest, and Anyone But Her. And I'm also the editor of an anthology, Denver Noir, which is part of Akashic Books Noir series. It's their Denver volume of that series. I've been, I don't know, are we doing like the history of I'm one of those people who's been a writer my whole life, but I published my first novel when I was 50. So I was a late in life to getting to it, but did finally start building up a publishing career starting in 2015. So it's been 10 years since my first book published.
Well, that's earlier than I did. I think I was 55 or 56 when I published my first
It's never
novel.
too late, and that's what's great about it. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, if you have a life and you have children and things like that, and married and all that, those things kind of take preference over everything. When I was a single man, I had written some books in the '80s, got married, had a kid. It's like, okay, all that's now the main priority. And then
Right.
when my daughter
Right.
got old enough, and I figured, well, I'll revisit it again, see how it goes. So,
Yeah, that was a little bit similar. I mean, I was one of those people that, wrote my whole life and always wanted to be a writer. And that was the goal. And I took a little veer in college and was an architecture major actually for the first 2 years of college. And I loved it. I had a great time, and I've always loved design. And I did it because I thought I needed a practical career, which kind of sounds ridiculous now. Um, but when I was a sophomore in college, I kept sneaking off to the English department and taking creative writing electives anytime that I could. And when I was a sophomore, in spring of my sophomore year, my creative writing professor sat me down and she said, I know you're an architecture major and I don't know anything about your passion for that or your skills in that, but I have to tell you, whatever you do, don't stop writing because you're really good. And that was, I was 20 years old, and it was like such a validating thing to hear somebody say that at that age. It was very cool. And I ended up changing my major to English and becoming, graduating and working in marketing and working in technical communications for a long time. And I always wrote. I kept writing stories. I kept working on novels, and I did that for years. And I got married late in life, had kids late in life, and we got married and had 3 kids within 4 years, and writing just went straight out the window when that happened. And that went on for, the first, my older 2 are twins until they were about 6, and my younger one was 3. And then just one day, the idea for the novel that became the Bookseller just came to me, like just out of nowhere. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, this has some potential. Maybe it's time to get back to writing. And that's when I started writing that book. So, and then it was, a few years to get on the publishing journey from there.
I can't even imagine having twins. We had one child, and that was hard enough work. Can't imagine. And then doing 3 and 4 years with the
it was a lot when they were all little, but they're in their 20s, and the younger one's about to graduate high school. So, we're in a better space now.
Well, hopefully they thank you every day for all that hard work that you put in.
They do. They're very appreciative, actually. They're good kids, all 3.
So you said you've been writing really since college, or would you do it in like high school and stuff? You always were kind of
high school, little kid. Like my mom gave me. My mom was an author. Well, she wasn't an author. She was a reporter and did a lot of marketing, kind of journalistic kind of stuff. She worked in PR. But she gave me, when she upgraded her typewriter, she gave me her old typewriter, and I was 7 years old because she knew I wanted to write. And so I would be like up in my room and banging away on my typewriter. And so, I always did that. It was just something that was part of who I was.
Was it like a Royal type manual typewriter, one of those?
It was an Olivetti because my dad worked for Olivetti. So we always had Olivetti, which is an Italian company. And I don't think they're in existence anymore, but we always had Olivetti typewriters and then upgraded to Olivetti computers until they went out of business or got usurped by Apple. So.
Well, I don't miss the actual physical part of that, but I miss that sound. I don't know why that typewriter sound.
Yep.
And not necessarily the electric typewriter either. Just that
right.
manual.
Yep.
I kind of miss that. I wish they had a sound on your keyboard where you could do it. Maybe there is, but
I bet there is. They've got everything. I'll bet there is such a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, my fingers though got sore after a while getting used to it. So.
Yeah.
So you wrote, Ron. So do you remember the first real thing you ever wrote? Do you still have it? That first little short story or maybe poems or something like that?
I'm trying to, I do remember I don't remember what the very first thing is, but I do have an early memory of writing a story that I put into, actually told this same story to the Colorado Sun because they asked me that question last summer when they were interviewing me. But it was a story, and I think it was about a mouse, but it had to be a visual thing. So I made like out of a shoebox and a couple of paper towel rolls, and then I had the story on pieces of paper, and I had it illustrated, and I taped them together, and you rolled all the way through. So like the 2 different paper towel rolls, so you could see the story as it rolled along. And I know it was about a mouse, but I do not remember what happened to the mouse. And that was probably 2nd grade, sometime like that. So then I was writing novels. In high school, I was writing. They were, high school novels, but I was writing novels, and I just always kept doing it. It was something that I always did.
So you said a little bit of architecture. So you obviously have the ability to do some drawings. You drew the mice, I'm assuming.
The mice,
you still doodle in that way? You do some drawings every now and then and stuff?
I mean, I love design. I really do. I've done a lot of the design on our house. We're not doing anything else to it, but for a long time we were doing a lot of different remodeling projects, and so I was kind of chief designer for a lot of that, which was really fun. And actually, it's kind of come full circle because one of my sons is in college, an architecture major, so we have a lot of fun talking about architecture and design. We kind of it's our bond. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's always nice when they pick up. My daughter likes to write and doodle. Does she also does art? She likes to draw art. She's actually done. I have a couple of pictures on my back wall. I don't think I can really
Oh,
see them
lovely.
far
Yeah.
away. But my early covers, I had these ideas for covers, so she kind of did a little sketch drawing. Then we
Oh,
sent those
nice.
off to my actual cover designer,
Very cool.
and did that. I know the last book, she's like, I didn't really have to do much, so I probably need to start giving her more credit for.
Yeah, she should say it in the inside, inside
Yeah,
cover inspiration by.
that's right. So, okay, so what books? So obviously you like to write. I'm sure you like to read also.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
what did you like to read when in those younger days? Like also help fuel that imagination. Was
Oh
there?
gosh, I mean, I read a lot of this sort of the kid classics, and not to put a gender on it, but like the girl classics. I mean, I loved Little House on the Prairie, and that sort of level of stuff, A Little Princess, and those kinds of books. I liked E.B. White. I read all those E.B. White books. I loved Charlotte's Web and The Trumpet of the Swan and the Stuart Little. Those were great.
Hmm.
So yeah, I was kind of reading a lot of that sort of. There was a series about a family. They were like the All of the Kind family. That was one of my favorites, and that was set in in New York City on the Lower East Side, and it was about this family and kind of growing up there. That was a fun series. And then there was this author that I don't know whatever happened to her. She had a really odd name. It was like Zilpha Keating Snyder or something like that. And she wrote all these books that were sort of about magic and ghosts. And I think that's where my sort of love of ghosts came, was from reading those books. Every one of her books, they were all standalones. And they were all in different settings. And they were the character, these were like middle grade books, middle grade to like lower teen. Um, but they'd all be things like stories about a haunted house, and these kids were going and hanging out in the haunted house, or one where I'm trying to remember what some of the other ones were. But I loved those books. I loved her writing, and she's one of those writers that like didn't stick around as a classic like Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I'm not exactly sure why, because I thought her books were fabulous. They're worth looking at.
Well, you know how it is. Sometimes maybe you run out of ideas. Publishing company doesn't want to publish them anymore. I mean,
That could be. Yeah, I mean, this was in the 70s, so I
yeah,
don't
so
know.
it's been way before where you could
Yeah,
just self-publish. But yeah.
right, right.
So what do you like to read now?
I just finished reading, and it's funny that you mentioned when we were talking earlier. Another person that we were doing the panel with, Marie Sutro. I got a recommendation from her podcast for a book called The Night Guest, and the author is Hilda. I can't think of her last name. It's set in Iceland, in Reykjavik, and it's a really interesting story. It's about this woman who. Um, she's exhausted all the time, and she can't figure out why, and she goes to the doctor and they can't figure out why, and they run tests and like nobody can figure out what's going on. And then one night she falls asleep with her smartwatch on, and she gets up the next morning and she's walked 40,000 steps, and she doesn't know why. And it's not just sleepwalking, it gets
Yeah,
creepier and creepier
that
as
would
it
be a
goes
lot
on.
of sleepwalking.
Yeah, it's a very short book. And
Yeah.
but it just like, it's very short, and the chapters sometimes are just one line. It was a really interesting structure to a book. Like when I read, a lot of times, I don't know if this happens to you, but as authors, I think I spend a lot of time analyzing the structure and the cadence, and it's not as much just sort of get lost in the story. which I think it was before I was a published author, or, before I was as deep into my writing career as I am now. I'd just be like, read a book, and now I'm just like, I want to know, first of all, can that author get me from point A to point B? Can they nail it? Can they stick that ending? And then I want to know that I'm going to believe all the pieces that they put in there. And I'm so interested in the different structures of how people put their books together. So I just find that fascinating.
Well, and I saw on your website you do um, editing and storybook um, suggestions and all that. You read manuscripts, so
Yeah,
do you kind of come at it from that angle too in your reading as well? Go, well, I would have might have done it this way or a little different, or
well, when I work with it, yeah, I do developmental editing,
yeah,
as well as write my own books. And when I do developmental edit, I try not to tell the author, this is what you should do. Instead, I try
mhm,
to raise a question, of like, this didn't really work for me, and here's why. And it's sort of just bringing up, not this is how I think you could fix it, as much as sort of a, let's talk about it and see if we can figure out a way that they still have ownership of it because it's their book,
right,
and I'm not rewriting the book. That's when I do a developmental edit for an author. I also work with some people who are more writing like business writing or memoir or something like that. And they don't necessarily want to hone their writing skills. They just want their book out. And so they've written a draft of it and they've got their information down and they just want me to edit it. And that's fine. And so that's, in some ways, it's like, I just do that and it's a little bit easier because it's just like, I just do what I think needs to be done. And as long as the
right.
client is happy with it. But the developmental edits are ultimately really rewarding because I'm helping people with their writing skills as well. And that's certainly you know, a fun thing to be able to do.
So when you look at your own writing, do your own editing, or do you get a separate editor to do the editing for you?
I do both. I mean, I certainly do a lot of editing on my own before it goes to my editor.
Mhm.
But I have worked with a developmental editor for every one of my novels. So I think that having that professional eye on the book is really critical to getting the story where it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. And I'm not a great English major by any stretch of the imagination. Overusing words and things like that. I get a lot of that stuff from my editors. Like, you already said this.
Yeah, that's,
This
I
doesn't
mean,
move the story forward. I get a lot of
yeah,
that,
let's keep going. Yeah.
and so I see a lot of red in my manuscripts. I'd like to think I've gotten better through the years, but I don't look at it quite that critically sometimes when I'm writing. And I'm very much a pantser too, which we'll talk about a little bit of that a little
Mhm.
bit later. So do you find writing therapeutic?
Oh, absolutely. And when I'm not writing, I find it's sort of the opposite, that I'm getting kind of edgy. I've even had my husband mention that to me, that, he can tell when I'm not getting in my writing time because I'm not quite myself. So, yeah, I absolutely need to do that. And I certainly try to do it every day. Every
Hmm.
now and then, something happens and the day just falls apart and it doesn't happen. Most of the time I try to write in the morning, but there's times where I on a deadline for a client project or something else is going on and I can't. And then that it definitely affects my mental state. But sometimes you just can't work around it.
So what was your first published work then?
My first published work, probably one of my short stories. I'm trying to remember which one was the first one that would have been published. I think it would have been like in the early 90s, maybe. One of my short stories. It was actually interesting because I'm kind of going back and I've been writing some short stories. I decided to kind of take a little break from novel writing recently, and I've been working on short stories. So I'm revisiting some of those old ones and looking at them, and it's kind of fun to look at the things that I wrote years and years ago. They weren't as dark and as suspenseful as what I write now. Um, so I think my writing has kind of changed and evolved from what I was doing back then. Um, there were a lot about sort of relationships and friendships, sometimes families for sure. So, and my writing is still about those things. It's just that there's always kind of this little knife edge of unease in there that wasn't part of my writing when I was early in my writing career, and it certainly is now.
And were they still mystery? Those short stories that you wrote, were
No,
they a
not
mystery?
really. I mean, I would say, I mean, and also like, unless you're like straight up trying to publish short stories in a mystery, you know, magazine kind of thing. I mean, I was going to literary journals, so they would have had more of like that literary feel to them, or at least that's sort of the goal that I was after back then. So yeah, it's definitely changed since then.
All right. So what was your what you so you've got four books that you had mentioned to me and I've seen on your website and stuff. So what was the first one?
So the first one's the Bookseller. And so the Bookseller, published in 2015, is published by HarperCollins, and it is set in Denver in the early 1960s, and it's the story of a woman who's caught between a dream life and a real life, and she's a bookseller in one of her lives. So she's a bookseller, and like she's, when the book opens, she owns a bookstore, and she's 38 years old. She's never been married, and she owns a bookstore with her best friend, and she's very content. And then she starts having these dreams that she has this other life, and in her other life, she's married and she's got kids, and the bookstore is no more, and she's not talking to her best friend anymore. And she has no idea why, but she keeps going and having, dreaming about this other life. And so she does a little bit of research back in her bookseller life, and she finds that, but for a very small missed moment, the dream life would have been her life. So that's kind of what it's about. And like, kind of building that suspense of what's really going on here, and, what's going on with this dream scenario, and what would make a person do that.
And this book has been optioned to be made into a movie.
It has. It's been optioned by Julia Roberts' production company, Red Ohm. They've had an option for a number of years now, but they seem pretty committed to doing it. I mean, they keep renewing the option, and they seem to really want to do it. So I don't, I'm hopeful. Like, my agent said, your book is a movie when you're sitting in the movie theater eating your popcorn and watching it up on the screen over there. That's when it's a movie. Until then, like, anything can fall apart. But it's hopeful that they've never dropped the option, even like during pandemic, which kind of surprised me. I thought for sure they drop it during pandemic, but they didn't. So I don't know. We'll see. They seem to really want to do it. It's just there's a lot of pieces to it. So there's nothing I can do about it. It's so completely out of my control. I just let them do their thing and hope it happens.
So when they renew the option each time, do they pay you a little bit more?
No, I wish they did. It doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Usually it's the other way around. So it should work. It doesn't, they're just kind of dangling, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to guess that because it was Julia Roberts, did you get to meet Julia Roberts?
No, I have not met Julia Roberts. I hope I will when and if it actually is a movie. So
She's actually in it. I mean,
yeah,
production company.
I mean, originally she had planned to star in it as the lead role, but I think she's gotten busier with a lot of other projects, and the character's 38, and it's not that she couldn't still pull off 38. She absolutely could. But yeah. I think, she's kind of they're thinking about some other actresses now too. So we'll see. A lot of it is, like I said, it's completely out of my hands. I just let them do their thing. So, but they have a script that they're happy with, and they're trying to work through the other pieces that are involved. There are a lot of pieces to it that are maybe happening.
Yeah, well, age in Hollywood is no big deal. Tom Selleck played Jesse Stone, and he was like 60 some years old. Jesse Stone was only supposed to be in his 30s, late 30s. So,
Yeah. It's totally doable. Totally doable if she decides she wants to do it.
They could de-age you these days in Hollywood too with visual effects and stuff. So has there ever been a script written? Have you ever seen a script?
I've never seen the script, and I know the script is written. It was written by, I can't think of the name of the guy, but he wrote that movie about, now I'm losing that too. He wrote the movie that was like that. There was a sort of like a mailbox. It's almost another missed moment one, but there was a mailbox and there was two different scenes. Sandra Bullock was in it. I can't think of the name of that movie now. It was a while back. But he wrote that one and a few other ones. So he's been around. But they've not shown it to me, and I guess that's kind of common that they don't. I mean, one of the things that happened when this all happened, when they showed interest, I talked to my agent about it, and she said, "Look, if you get optioned by somebody like that, that's as well known as Julia Roberts," she said, "you have to be willing to let go of control,
Sure.
and and let them. The creative control is now theirs, and if you don't want to do that, or if you're unwilling to do it, then we shouldn't say yes to this option." So, I mean, to me, like, it's cool that the book is optioned, and it would be super cool if they made it. But in my mind, the coolest thing about that would be that hopefully people would be drawn to go check out the book if they hadn't already done it. So we'll see how that all ends up going out. But there's a lot of pieces to it that I really don't know. Like, it's set in Denver. Would they actually set it in Denver? I don't know. The story could take place anywhere. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were like, you know what, it's easier for us to go on set in this city and go somewhere else with it. It wouldn't surprise me if they did that. So,
And wherever it's cheaper too. So
yeah.
Chris here is one of my author friends. She was asking if you could choose an actress to play the main character, who would it be? We've already mentioned Julia, but is there someone else that you think could play it besides Julia Roberts?
I mean, I think there's a lot of people who could play. But I'm not really up on my actresses very well. I don't go to a lot of movies, surprisingly, but
Yeah.
but I think there's a lot of people who are in that age range right now, in that like 30s and 40s age range, and it's great to have roles at that age that are good, solid roles that somebody could, find their way into. So I know that they've got a list of people that they're talking to. So we'll see which of those people ends up, being the one that is the person.
Well, we'll have to be watching for that. She also mentioned there in another comment, the Lake House.
Lake House. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you, Chris. That's
Yeah.
it. The Lake House. That
Yeah.
is exactly the movie. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so it was the guy that wrote that screenplay is the guy that wrote the
See,
screenplay.
Sandra Bullock could play it, right?
Yeah, yeah. There you go.
You could get, is there a male character? Get Keanu Reeves in it. So
Oh yeah. Well, there's the husband, and he's great. He's like
he's been busy killing everybody lately in his John Wick movies. So he'd
yeah,
have
we
to make
probably,
quite a turn there. So
exactly.
a lot of differences. Okay, so yeah, that book. I mean, the storyline sounds very interesting. So would you consider that a psychological thriller, or is it more of a suspense?
It's more suspense. Yeah. I mean, I kind of think I moved, and it's always that kind of thing of like, what is the difference between thriller and suspense?
Right.
Like, I mean, there's nobody like, there's no, killer walking around with a knife behind her or anything
Right.
like that. So, and it is psychological, and all of my books focus more on the psychology than on the, big scary monster. So, yeah. So I think that one, especially that one is probably my least dark novel. I definitely got darker as I went along. And that one I kind of just was starting with that psychological aspect. So, but the suspense element is, well, what's going on here?
So that was a standalone. I think all your novel,
They're all
three
standalones. Yeah.
are standalone. So what was the second book you put out?
So the second one is The Glass Forest, and that came out in 2018 from Simon and Schuster. And yeah, that's The Glass Forest. So The Glass Forest, again, it's standalone, and that one is also set in the 1960s. And it's the story of this kind of complex family where one of the family members goes missing. It's a three-way narrative, and the first narrator is named Angie Glass, and Angie is 21 years old. She lives in Door County, Wisconsin. If you're familiar with Door County at all, it's a beautiful kind of vacation-y
I'm
area.
a Packer fan, so Door
What's
County,
that?
Green Bay Packers. Go Pack.
Go back. Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm a Packers fan.
So yes,
Um,
Door County, big
so
town.
she lives in Door County. She grows up there, and so she's 21. She's married to this guy named Paul Glass, who is 17 years older than her, and just kind of showed up in her little town in Door County one day, and they had this whirlwind romance and got married, and they have a baby, he's 6 months old, and so Angie's blissfully happy. And then the phone rings one day, and it's Paul, her husband's niece, and her name is Ruby Glass. And she says she calls to tell them that her father has committed suicide and her mother has run away. And so Ruby and her family live in a small town in north of New York City, about an hour and a half north of New York City. It's a fictional town called Stonekill, New York. And so Paul and Angie drop everything and go to this little town, Stonekill, to be with Angie, or to be with Ruby while she's going through this situation. And Angie's, thinks she's going there to mother this girl. She's like, well, I'm the adult, I'm going to be taking care of her, even though she's only 4 years older than her. But she's like, I'm married, I have a baby, I'm in charge. But she finds that Ruby is not the kind of person who wants to be mothered or taken care of. And Ruby is a very standoffish and very odd 17-year-old. And she's the second narrator. So she's telling us the story too through her viewpoint. And then the third narrator is Celia, who's Ruby's mother, and she's the missing woman. And her story starts in 1942, which is almost 20 years before the main action of the book. And kind of leads up to what happens with her disappearance and her husband's suicide. And so it's all of these pieces kind of coming together from these three different narrators and pulling together into the story of what's really going on with this family. And, where is Celia? Did her husband really commit suicide? And what's going on here? So that's what's going on with Glass Forest.
So is each it's first person from three different points of view. Is that the way
it's interesting? It's Angie is first person, and Ruby and Celia are both third person. And when I first wrote it, this is again the value of a developmental editor, although she did kind of tell me, well, she didn't tell me what to do, but she suggested. So my developmental editor for that book was somebody I hadn't worked with before, but my agent suggested her because I'd been working on it for a couple of years. My agent had read it. I'd read it. And my agent was like, it needs something, but I don't know what. And I'm going to suggest this editor to you that I think would be a really good fit for this book. So I hired that editor, and she read it. And the version that she read, Ruby was in first person and Angie was in third person. And she said, this would be a lot of work, but try switching those. She said, I just feel like because Angie's like, we're kind of, it's the story starts with her and she's the one who's kind of like the mystery's unfolding for her. I feel like we should, as readers, should kind of be right along with her in the first person. And the other two are a little bit more mysterious. And so I think she said, take Ruby out of the first person and make her third and just try it a little bit and see what you think. And so I did a couple chapters. And I sent it to my agent and I said, you're not going to believe this. It's so much better this way. And I hadn't seen it. My agent hadn't seen it. And so I had to go and change every single instance for those two narrators. But it was absolutely worth it. And it ended up being a much better book that way. And that's the way that we ended up submitting it to Touchstone, which was an imprint of Simon & Schuster, which is where I was at that point. So I'd been at Harper for the Bookseller, and then and my editor at the Bookseller, my editor at Harper retired in between the hardcover and the paperback coming out. And so the project was passed on to somebody else to do the paperback. And we had to give her the Glass Forest as an option book. And she wasn't that jazzed about it. She did a lot more nonfiction than fiction. She was a very nice person, but it just wasn't her thing. So then my agent took it out on Wide Sub, and we ended up at Touchstone, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. And so that's the publisher that put out the Glass Forest, and they did a very good job. So, I hit the USA Today bestseller list, and it did fine. But then about 8 months after that book came out, Touchstone announced they were closing their doors. So again, I was left without a publisher. They gave it to another one. They gave all their titles to other imprints at Simon & Schuster, but those imprints obviously had their own titles, so they weren't paying much attention to my book, which meant that again I was kind of orphaned at that point. So it's been a lot of ups and downs and setbacks, and I could keep telling you that saga with the other books. It goes on.
Yeah. I hear that from a lot of authors who are more traditionally published, and the closing, and you lose control of the cover sometimes, and
Be a real
with
struggle. With the Bookseller, there actually was an entire other cover that they had. I'll show it to you. Hold on. Mm-hmm. So that's what it used to look like, and that was what the arcs looked like. That's what they sent it out with. And about maybe 2 months or so before the book was due to come out, they called me up. My agent called me up, and she said, they're changing the cover. And I said, well, why are they doing that? And she said, because the head fiction buyer at Barnes & Noble doesn't like that cover. And I was
Oh,
like,
really?
wow, the head fiction buyer Barnes and Noble has a lot of clout. If they can even make
Yeah.
HarperCollins like change a cover at this point, but they did. And actually, I did like the new cover better. So I mean, I liked that one too. But it was kind of interesting that they,
And
yeah,
what year was this?
2015. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that kind of stuff still happens, but it did back
Well,
then.
yeah, because the traditional bookstore is kind of. I mean, Barnes and Noble is about it anymore. So, and you
Right.
wonder how much longer they're going to survive. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
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 So yeah, they may not carry as much weight, but yeah, that's interesting. That
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
It's
I've
fun.
ever heard that before. Oh, excuse me. So that one's more. Would you say that one's more of a psychological?
I think so. Yeah.
More,
That one I was definitely getting a lot darker with. And there's much more layer of sort of like real mystery, like real threat, like what's going on here? I mean, we've got this guy who's, committed suicide, and then we've got a missing woman. And so we've got some pieces, and Angie's husband is, kind of finding out some things about him as we go along. So yeah, so there's a lot more pieces to that one, maybe in a different way than the Bookseller. I loved writing that book, and I like revisiting it every now and then because I don't get a chance to talk about it quite as often.
so then next was
Next was Denver Noir.
the
So
okay.
yeah, I mean, I was working on writing another novel, but then like pandemic comes along, and so fall of 2020, I get an email, and it's Akashic Books, or somebody connected me with Akashic Books, and if you're not familiar with that series, this is Akashic Books is a small publisher in Brooklyn, and they do this noir series, and these books are set. They're anthologies, and they're set in cities all over the country and all over the world. There's like 120 of these. So, and they didn't have a Denver volume, and they knew that it was kind of a big hole that they didn't have Denver. So they were looking for an editor, and my name came up. And so they got in touch with me and asked if I wanted to do that. And I was like, heck yeah, I'll do that. So it ended up being like such a great project. I mean, the first thing they asked me to do was put together a list of authors. There's 14 authors in the collection, 13 plus me, and each person wrote a story that's between 3,000 and 6,000 words, and they're all local Denver or Colorado authors. And they were very specific. They said, we want a couple of well-known authors, we want some emerging authors, and we want some people who are kind of middle of their career. We want some authors who lean a little bit more mystery, and some who lean a little bit more literary, and we want people from a variety of backgrounds. So that was a lot to kind of pull together that list. So I curated that list of authors, and it had to be people that I thought I could get. So I put together this list, some of whom I knew and some of whom I didn't. Like, you can't just like recommend all your friends. Obviously, I had to really put some thought into like who's going to be what's going to make a good collection, a good combination of people. So I did that, and I sent them a proposal, and they loved it. And so we signed a contract, and then I had to go ask all those people if they would write a story. And all of them except two said yes. And the two that said no they just had time constraints and they couldn't do it. So, but everybody else said yes. And then we started going. And Akashic had given me the great advice of staggering the deadlines of when people got stories to me. They said, give your better known authors a little more time because they're going to need it. They're so busy. And then your kind of newer authors are going to be more eager, so they'll get something to you sooner. And so that's what I did, and that worked out well. And so that published in May of 2022. So coming up on 3 years ago, and of course, pandemic was not over, but it was at a point where we could start going out and doing events, and so the timing was great, and we did a ton of events, and it was really fun to do them because with 14 people, with 13 of the authors and then me, like I was at every event, but then it would be different authors that would read each time. And then I always invited everybody. So they just ended up being kind of a nice big party every time. So it was really fun. Just a wonderfully rewarding experience. And just all the authors in there are amazing. Peter Heller has a story in there. Dave Wyden has a story in there. Manuel Ramos has a story in there. Mario Acevedo, if you know who he is, has a story in there. We have a story told in graphic in picture form by a fantastic storyteller named Ellen Brooks, who's local here. So we have some really great people. It was a lot of fun to do. Really
Well, I
great.
was looking at all the authors, and several of them I've had on my show. I've had
Yeah.
Barbara Nicholas, I've had Manuel
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Yeah.
you obviously tonight, and
Yep.
then I'm going to have Mark Stevens on too,
Oh, he's great.
probably at the end of May. So
Yeah. Yeah.
is what we got scheduled. So
Yeah.
yeah, so a lot of authors. So I got to look at the rest of these names because
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
of them I'm not familiar with. So what was it like putting that all together though, and how much time was involved?
It was very time consuming. I mean, it was not a project that I did like for fun and well, for fun, but not profit. Like, and I knew that. I mean, I knew it was going to be a labor of love. You know, they gave like Akasha gave me a modest advance for that. But it was just, it was so much time, but it was worth it. Like I said, it was during pandemic. The manuscript had to be done. I first started talking to them in October 2020 and the manuscript had to be done by June. So, you know, we had about 9 months to get it pulled together. Um, but it came together just fine, and I got everybody. I did have two people who had to drop out, and I replaced them with two others. And again, it was time constraints. They just knew they couldn't get it done. So, but it was like during the time that I was getting stories, it was sort of like, you know, every morning be like Christmas morning, like I'd open my email and be like, "Ooh, who do I have a story from today?" You know. So that was really fun, and they were all just wonderful to work with, regardless of whether they were somebody really well known or somebody who was, you know, just emerging and beginning their career. All of them were really fun to work with.
So besides the length, and it need to take place in the Denver or Colorado, I'm assuming,
Yep.
what other guidelines were they given, or were they pretty much free reign to do what they wanted to do?
Well, one of the guidelines is every story is set in a specific neighborhood in Denver or in the, you know, close to the city,
Mhm.
and so they all had to have a neighborhood. And so when I did the proposal, I kind of had to make my best guess of what each of those authors might pick as their neighborhood. And then when I talked to them, then we had to make sure that we had neighborhoods, you know, that we were kind of geographically spread out. So everything wasn't all clustered together in one spot. So that was kind of, that was another constraint of it. But we worked it out, and I think everybody got to write stories in places that they wanted to. Another author that's was at um, Left Coast, that I don't know if you went to the short story panel, but Francilia Belton was on that panel because she writes only short stories, and she wrote a fantastic story in Denver Noir that's set in 5 points. It was a really fun story about a young trumpeter who gets himself into some bad stuff.
Really?
And it's set in 1950s, like during the jazz age in 5 points. So that was really fun. So yeah, there's some great stories in there.
So yeah, with all those different authors, I'm thinking is like, did any of these storylines seem to kind of cross over into each other or be similar in any way, or are they all really very different?
They were really different, and that's the other thing is that Akashic is they have a very loose definition of noir. It's not like all gumshoe detective. I mean, we had a few stories that were certainly detective type stories, but it really, the way that they kind of define it is morally ambiguous, dark and morally ambiguous. So that leaves it pretty wide open for what you're going to do. For instance, my story, I set my story in Cheeseman Park here in Denver, which has a kind of a ghosty history. And it was, I don't know if you know the history of Cheeseman Park, but it was at one point when the city was first being developed in the 1870s and 1880s, it was a cemetery. And when the city decided they wanted to make it a park, they had to get all the bodies exhumed. And so they hired an undertaker.
Poltergeist, right? You think of Poltergeist, the movie, right?
Well, they
Well, they
hired an
didn't move the
undertaker
bodies.
to do this, to move the bodies, and they did it. They turned out to do it in a pretty disrespectful and grim way, and they didn't quite finish the job. So they say there's something like 2,000 bodies still buried in Cheeseman Park, and that's why people think it's haunted. And I completely believe that too. It actually comes up in my novel Anyone But Her when we talk about that. Cheeseman plays a big part in that. But anyway, I wrote my story set in 1893 when they did that digging up and exhuming of the graves, and it's through the viewpoint of a young gravedigger going through that experience of working on that project. So there's a kind of, so it's, you know, so it's like they're very dark, and it's like you're kind of put in this situation, but it's not, you know, it's not necessarily that there's a killer on the loose and the detective's going to catch them. There are a few of those stories in this collection, but not all of them.
So you said they do them in various cities. They're
Yep.
so is there any talk about doing a second
I would
for
love to do another one if they ever wanted to. I mean, I certainly would do it. They do have some cities where they've done second ones. Boston has two. Dennis Lehane is the editor of Boston. Brooklyn, where they're based, has two. I think LA has two. So there are some cities where they've done two, and it kind of just depends on the popularity of the book. So everybody has to go buy a copy of the book now, so we
That's
can keep
right.
making it really popular and get another one.
Well, I think they had those at Left Coast Crime, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
They
they
did.
sold out right away. They sold out so fast. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure it was very popular.
yeah.
So then your latest book.
Yeah, yeah. So the new one is Anyone But Her. And that one just came out in September of this past year, 2024. And what's interesting with that one is that I self-published that one. So as I mentioned, when I was at Touchstone with Simon and Schuster, Touchstone with Simon and Schuster with The Glass Forest, I got orphaned from them. And so it was kind of at a point where I didn't have a publisher again. And I went through with this book, I started writing this book in 2019, and we went through a lot of versions of it. I went through two different agents with it. My original agent and I parted ways in the middle of working on this book, but she had already taken it out on submission. My new agent took it out on submission. I just wasn't getting traction on it. I finally got to the point where I was like, I just really believe in this book and I want it out. And so I decided to self-publish it. And so I did that last year. And it kind of, again, goes back to I'll keep hitting on the developmental editor thing, but like, before I self-published it, when I made the decision to do that, which was probably late 2023 or so, I went back to my developmental editor for the Bookseller, and I said, we had trouble finding a traditional publisher for this book, and I need to know, is this thing publishable? Like, what's going on? Because I think I might self-publish it. And so she read it. I hired her to read it, and she read it, and she said, she said it was missing one little element that she couldn't quite understand, and she just raised the question, but didn't fix it for me. And once she raised the question, it completely solidified it, and I'm like, man, that was it. So Anyone But Her, backing up and telling you about it. Again, it's a standalone psychological suspense. It's a dual timeline. It's set in Denver. Both timelines are in Denver, 1979 and 2004. And so in 1979, the main character, Suzanne, is 14 years old, and her mother has just been murdered at a, I just saw Maurice Suter come on. Her mother has just been murdered at her record store. She owns a record store on Colfax, on East Colfax, called Zoe's Records. And so the mother, her name is Alex, was murdered at her record store during a armed robbery. And Suzanne, about 6 months after Alex is murdered, Alex shows up to Suzanne as a ghost. And Suzanne is clairvoyant and has been seeing ghosts her whole life. And so she's not at all surprised that her mom finally shows up. She's been waiting for her to show up. But her mom starts raising some alarm bells about the circumstances around this murder. And around the armed robber who, and we find this out in chapter 1, he actually ends up getting in a shootout with the cops and doesn't survive. And so the case is sort of closed, and that's that. He murders her and then he's killed, and end of story. But Alex, the ghost, does not think that's the end of the story. And so she urges Suzanne, her 14-year-old daughter, to do some investigation into what might be going on. And so Suzanne, 14-year-old Suzanne, is tasked with that. And so the 1979 timeline is about that and the very long-lasting repercussions that go on because of this investigative journey that Suzanne goes on into her mother's murder. In 2004, Suzanne comes back to Denver after living away for decades. She moves away for college and never goes back until she's kind of forced to come back because her husband gets a job there, and they're sort of desperate. So they move back to Denver, or she reluctantly moves back to Denver. And it's sort of one of those situations where the past is not going to be letting go quite so easily. And she knew that, going into it, but even more so than she thought. There's a lot of mystery around what's going on in 2004 and how it connects with what happened in 1979. So that's what the book is about. And kind of going back to what I said about my developmental editor, the piece that she told me about, or that she made the suggestion about, is that in all of the other earlier renditions of the book that I'd done, I was sort of wishy-washy about Alex being a ghost. Is Alex a ghost? Is she not a ghost? What's really going on here? And that was what my developmental editor, she said, I cannot get a handle on that ghost. Is she a ghost? Is she not a ghost? And I said, you know what? I don't think that I really have been very firm about that. And it's just one of those things where you just realize as an author that sometimes you don't lean into your confidence as much as you should. And so before, in all those earlier renditions, Suzanne was not clairvoyant. So I'm like, all right, I either need to make this mom a ghost or I need to take it out. And so if I really am going to do a full lean in, then I'm going to do a full lean in. And so that's when I made Suzanne clairvoyant, and really kind of had the ghost aspect is be as much a part of the mystery as the mystery and the murder. I have a couple of friends who are mediums and are clairvoyants, and I had them read it after I'd done that new rendition with that, and give me some advice about whether I was accurately portraying that. And so that was a really interesting experience to go through that with them and talk to them about that. And they gave me some really good advice that I think made the book a lot better. So I've been really happy with how it turned out. And it was a good process to go through independently publishing a novel. I did, I had to tell my agent I was going to do this, and this is my new agent. She's great. I really love her, and she's wonderful. And she said, she completely understood. And she said, do you want me to still try to sell the audio? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. So she did. She was able to sell the audio to Tantor Media. And so the audio is traditionally published, which is nice because then I didn't have to do it. But then I did the ebook and the print book. Obviously hired a cover designer. I did my own interior pages, which was kind of fun and goes back to that old, the design that I love. So, and kind of had a lot of fun little details. So that was a little bit, I didn't get crazy artistic with it, but I wanted it to look nice. And I think it came out pretty well. It came out pretty nice. And then just because I've been traditionally published and had built a pretty good following and have some good relationships with bookstores and libraries around here, I was able to do a number of events, which was good. So word has gotten out pretty well about it. It actually just got named best nationally published novel by Westward in their best of Westward for 2025, which was really nice. That was a nice nod from Westward. And then it also is a finalist for the Colorado Book Award in the thriller category. So that's very cool. So I've been really happy with the reception with it. It seems to be very popular with readers, and it's doing really well. And so, I'm glad I did it. I'm really glad I did it. People ask me all the time, are you going to do it for your next book? Are you going to independently publish again? And it's all I can say is, I don't know. I'll have to finish the next book and then just see how I feel. But it's nice to know that I can, if I want to.
Well, Marie got on. She said, awesome.
Yep.
For a little bit. And then Chris says, that's her type of book, she said. She says, this is my kind of book. She can't wait to read it. So.
Thank you, Chris. I hope you enjoy it.
So the cover, is that an LP that I see on there?
Yeah. You can put it back up if you want.
LPs are making a comeback these days. So,
it's not like it's
a museum thing anymore.
Yeah, because Alex owns a record.
Is there some little hidden thing with the LP that's involved in the story?
Yeah, because Alex, the mom, owns a record store. So, she owns a record store in 1979. And Suzanne spends a lot of time in her mom's store. In fact, as a 14-year-old, or after all this happens, and during the main action of the story, she starts hanging out in the record store, which is just kind of closed up. Like Suzanne's dad, just didn't want to deal with it. So he just wrote the landlord a check and was like, I'll think about it another time. So Suzanne just starts hanging out in there. And so there's a lot of scenes that actually take place in that record store, even though there's no lights anymore. There's no electricity. But all the stock is still there. So she's just kind of surrounded. It's actually called Zoe's Records. And there's a mannequin in the corner named Zoe, and she's holding an electric guitar, and she's this musician. And so Zoe is still there too. And so Suzanne and Zoe and some other elements come into that setting. And that was really fun too, to kind of, put in all the 70s music and kind of add a lot of those pieces in there. And then actually Suzanne, in the 2004 timeline, you find this out pretty early in the book, when they move back to Denver, she finds that space is empty. There's nothing in there. So she decides to rent it, and she opens up a consignment art store for female artists in the space that was where Zoe's Records is. So that all is kind of a big part of it. Yeah. Is bringing that all together.
So I saw on your website that a lot of your books have been translated into different languages. What's that process like? That's
It's
got to be
it's funny
challenging.
actually. I was thinking about that with that one that I mentioned that Marie recommended, The Night Gust, which was translated from, I guess, Icelandic into English. And I also, and we're actually going to talk about that book in my book club this month. And it's kind of one of the things that I always wonder is like, how much gets lost in translation? Because as the author, unless you speak that other language, you don't know. So, I mean, I have copies of my books in all the languages that they've been translated into, and they're beautiful. They look really pretty, so the
Can't
covers
read
are all,
them unless you read that language. Don't know that language.
yeah,
Huh?
you don't know. You're like, well, I hope it's good. I mean, I guess it gets good reviews, so I guess it's okay. The covers are all completely different, and sometimes they change the title, which they're allowed to do if they want. They can't change my name, obviously, but sometimes they will change the title if they feel there's something that will be more commercially successful in their country, and that's okay to do. But yeah, it is interesting to see how the different countries handle it. But again, it's sort of like the movie process in that you just let that go. It's just sort of like that's not something that I'm glad that I get that extra readership in other countries, and just kind of have to hope that it's
Well,
what
well,
we
as
think it
long as you get
is.
the royalties, right?
And you get the royalties, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
So is it a different publishing company that handles it over there, or is it
yeah, yeah, it's publishing companies in those countries.
right?
So so your agent kind of, a lot of agents work with an international agent who works with those publishing companies and tries to get publishing deals there. And so that's what happened with both the Bookseller and the Glass Forest. Those are the only two that are translated. So, but yes, they both the Bookseller is in like 18 languages, I think, and the Glass Forest is in, I think, 7.
Yeah, there was a lot of different languages in there. It's like,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what are you working on now?
So I was working on a novel and doing really well with it, and moving along quite well. And it's historical. It's set in a fictional town in Colorado, mountain town and also in Denver in 1938. And it's a mystery. And that was going really well until the election, to be honest with you. And like, it just sort of felt like it just got very, very hard with everything that's been going on in our country to focus. And I kind of beat myself up for it for a couple months, and was like pushing myself, pushing myself. And I finally, just a few weeks ago, just decided to take a step back and let myself work on something else for a little while. So I've been writing some short stories, and I'm feeling really good about doing that for as long as it takes me. It's a little bit sort of like we were talking about writing being therapy. And like right now, that's what's feeling therapeutic to me. That's what's
Mhm.
calling me. So that's what I'm working on. And I'm really enjoying it. I know I'm going to go back to that book, and I think it might be soon because I keep thinking about it. At first I wasn't thinking about it very much, but now I'm like, oh, but what about if we did. So now I'm thinking it might soon be time to get back to that novel. But in the meantime, I'm just enjoying working on the stories, and I don't know what I'll do with them. But right now, I'm just kind of letting myself enjoy that, because I think we all could use a little enjoyment when we can get it these days. You
Yeah,
know,
it's
so
hard to see all that stuff, especially on social media and everything. And
absolutely, yeah,
it can
yeah,
be.
yeah,
I try to. I've always prided myself in being somewhat Teflonish. The things kind of just roll off me, but
yeah.
after a while, the Teflon does wear off.
Right,
It's like, ugh.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
but I understand. But I'm sure you'll get back to it. I have a tendency. I'm not a diligent writer where I'm not one of those that write every day. I really feel like I have to be inspired to write. And then when I'm inspired, I can blow out a whole bunch of words all at once. So,
yes, yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
sure you'll get back to it and you'll probably read. You might have to, when you go back to it, you might have to start reading from the beginning
Oh, I
and see
absolutely
what
will. Yeah,
you've done.
yeah, yeah.
Unless you've
Yes.
got a photogenic memory or
No,
photographic or I
no,
don't
I
know.
will. I will definitely read from the beginning and review everything that I have there before I go forward.
So then, are you a pantser or are you an outliner or somewhere in between?
In
How's your
between,
writing
I
go?
would say I'm a little bit of a hybrid. I mean, I usually have somewhat of a good idea of what I'm, beginning, middle, end. But I don't necessarily have it completely detailed. The one that the 1938 one that I was working on, I did outlines. First time I've ever done that, and that did actually help with writing a first draft of it, which I was doing at the same time that I was trying to get anyone but her out in the world. And that actually was kind of great because I was spending so much time on all the details of getting a book out that I still wanted to work on that book. So it was kind of nice to have that outline because it was sort of like somebody was telling me what to do, even if the somebody was just me, you know. But that definitely helped when I was working on that draft at the same time as releasing Anyone But Her last summer, and getting ready to do that. So, but my other books, I completely pantsed it. So I kind of like to get a little more efficient. I'm not the fastest out there, and so I'm thinking that maybe I should be doing more outlining, but we'll see. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both for sure.
Yeah, I was on a panel in Killer Nashville with the outlining in Pantster, and I was sitting next to gentleman Jim, and he's and I always forget Jim's last name, and he does street type uh, crime books and stuff, you know, ghetto and stuff like that. But he was, I was talking about, probably as an outliner, you're probably more efficient and it makes it writing easier. And he goes, not necessarily.
Oh yeah, I don't think
you
so.
know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm actually teaching a class on that at Lighthouse Writers at their conference in June, at their LitFest conference. I'm going to teach a class on plotting versus pantsing. So we'll have a lot of interesting discussion about the pros and cons of both both approaches.
Yeah, I'm kind of putting together a little speech. I don't know if he's going to accept it or not, but at the Killer Nashville event, he was looking for keynote speakers, and I was going to come up with a little humorous thing about being a pantster. All the voices in our heads when we're writing and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but we'll see if if Clay's going to accept it. So is there a book that you want to write that you haven't written? Maybe something in a different genre or something a little out of the ordinary that's kind of rolling around in your head?
I have a few rolling around in my head, but they're not out of the genre, at least not right now. So I think I have about 3 others besides this one. So, and then maybe my sister and I started writing a book together one time. We had an idea for a kind of a wild idea for a book that's completely different than anything else. And she's a music teacher, and she kind of does her own thing, and she's a good writer too. So maybe someday we'll pull together and do that. We'll see. That could be our wild project.
When you said the book, I think you said it was the Bookseller, right? That was the one that just all came to you at once and go, oh, this is.
It really did. Yeah. 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 That one just.
Was that totally a pantser type of book?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely was. Yeah. Yeah. It was just like, there was just a moment that just kind of hit me, and the story just came together. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were some pieces in the middle that weren't quite what I thought they would be, but I kind of had a general sense of what would happen. And I wrote that one pretty quickly. I wrote a first draft of that book in 6 months. I think it was because I was so motivated to do it because I hadn't written in such a long time. So, and my kids were really little. So I was really just, a lot of times I was just writing, I mean, like 15 minutes a day, because it's all that I had. And I mean, when you're writing 15 minutes a day, you're not like trying to find the perfect word or anything. I was just like getting words on a page to get that done. But I got a first draft done in 6 months of that book. And then I was able to spend, a lot more time after that refining it. From the time I started writing it until I signed with my agent, it was probably about 2.5 years. So it's not like it was super fast or anything like that. It still took me a long time once I started pulling it together.
Yeah, Chris was talking about dealing with the trauma of the election.
Yeah.
Writing is therapy.
We're going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Here we are. Right? Yeah. Writing is definitely therapy. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes
we can fix everything in our books. We can't fix everything in the world. We can, whatever problem there is, our protagonist can take care of it, right? But
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. You got to have those heroes. Yeah.
So I always ask everybody, name of the shows, Bringing Life to Characters. What is it you look for when you're building those characters that get them to pop off the page? What is your secret?
Details. I'm pretty detailed. I mean, and kind of going back to that, what I just said about the first drafts, I feel like when I write first drafts of books, I don't really have that. They feel very generic to me. And that to me is what the power is of revision, of kind of bringing in those characteristics that make a character much more interesting. For instance, it's the character of Suzanne in Anyone But Her, my latest book. She has a pretty interesting hobby. She makes knives. And that was not a hobby that she had in earlier renditions of the book, I realized that she sort of needed something interesting to do. And I started, and so, I went to the hive mind. Like I went on to Facebook and I went in like one of those reader groups, like Reader's Coffee House or something like that. And I said, if you wanted to read a book about somebody with an interesting hobby, what would it be? And people were like, beekeeping or quilting or gardening or whatever. And somebody said making knives. And I was like, whoa, yes. And as it turns out, I have a neighbor who does that. So I was able to go over. I asked him if he would show me what he does, and so I went over and he gave me a tour of his workshop in his garage and showed me the process that he uses to do it. And he buys old knives and refurbishes them, and so that's what I had Suzanne do too. And so that was really kind of fun to just like those kinds of things. I think are the things that bring the characters to life. Is when you find things like that. And it made a lot of sense for this character. She was dealing with still a lot of trauma over all the things that had happened when she was younger, when she was 14. And so making knives was something that she does to try to feel safe. And so it just kind of pulled together in a really nice way. But again, I kind of have to thank that hive mind for coming up. I don't know, maybe I would have come up with it myself, but I cannot say that I would have for sure. And it worked out perfectly for this particular character.
So do your characters' names sometimes change in the revisions too, or do you usually kind of stick with the name you originally envisioned for them?
Most of the time I stick with them unless there's a logistical reason to change them. I try not to have too many names that start with the same letter because I think that can get confusing.
My beta
Um,
readers do that to me a couple times ago. A lot of your first names start with B. And I'm
yeah,
like,
right.
oh, you don't even realize it.
Yeah, right. And just things like that. You just kind of want to watch that stuff because it's easy to do in real life. We might know like 10 people named Bob and we can keep them all straight, but that doesn't mean you want 10 characters named Bob in your book. So, yeah. So yeah, I think just kinds of things like that.
And then some of the awards that you've won. I think you talked a little bit about them, but I think you've won a few or have been nominated at least
Yep.
for various awards.
Yeah. Yeah, the Bookseller won the WILLA Award, which is from Women Writing the West. So that was a really nice one. It was also a finalist for the High Plains Book Award. And Denver Noir won the Colorado Book Award. And Anyone But Her won the Indie Author Project Award, which is a great award for anybody who's independently published to take a look at. It's the Indie Author Project is a group, it's a nonprofit, and they connect independently published authors with libraries and librarians, and then they run this contest once a year. And so I entered it, and I entered it last like May, and the book was at that point still just like a PDF. It wasn't done. I didn't have a finished book, but they said I could enter that way, and it ended up winning last. I think November was when they announced it. So that was really nice. That was like its first kudos, and then being a finalist for the Colorado Book Award is kind of great. So yeah, the one that hasn't is the Glass Forest, and it's because of this is just one of those things. Like I didn't enter it in anything because with the Bookseller, Harper did all of that and I didn't do any of it. And so with the Glass Forest, I kind of figured it would happen and it didn't. And because the publisher was in the middle of imploding. But like, I didn't know to take the agency to do that. So that's one of those sort of word to the wise things. Like if you're an author is you got to stay on that stuff. Even if you think your publisher is doing it, you got to stay on it yourself because you just don't know for sure unless you've confirmed with them. Yes, we have entered it in such and such contest. So I just didn't even really kind of think about it. And it was a kind of a missed opportunity for the Glass Forest, which is too bad because it's like, I love that book. I think there should be awards someday for like books that published, 10 years ago.
Well,
should have won an award.
Yeah. Lifetime achievement, huh?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, there's so many book awards out there now, and they all want a piece of flesh. They all want money, and it's like which ones are legit, which ones aren't. So there are a few that will take back catalog books sometimes as well, but I don't know how well known they are. But I had to write that down. Indie Project Award. I was not aware of that.
Indie Author Project.
Because I'm totally self-published. All my stuff I've done myself. So I've won a few awards. I've been lucky, but it's always nice to trying to get other people to get their eyes on it because even though you win them, it doesn't always necessarily translate into sales sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Definitely look up the Indie Author Project. They're a good organization.
So, do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Read a lot. and write as much as you can, and just be willing to be okay with it not being perfect when you write early drafts, because it's not going to be. I think that's one of the things that can kind of hang up a lot of people, is just expecting perfection out of yourself and getting mad at yourself if it's not perfect. And it takes time. It takes, I mean, I spent 5 years writing Anyone But Her, and completely revised it top to bottom, rewrote the book 5 times. So, but you stick with it if you really believe in it.
Yeah, and in your case, you're doing a lot of they're all standalones, so different characters, different things.
Right.
I have 3 series, so but I just started a new series, and it took me longer starting this new series because
Of
I was
course.
trying
Yeah.
to be a little different. But my
Right.
private eye series, I feel like I can write blindfolded these days because I know the characters so
Right.
well because I've had 10 now 11th book is working on. So, but
Right.
when you're doing those standalones with new characters and stuff, there's a lot of building, and yeah, I'm sure there's lots of rewriting.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. I mean, that's why I choose to do that right now instead of
Mhm.
I've not come up with a great idea for a series, and it's not something I'm really looking to do right now, because I really do like writing something brand new every time. To
Mhm.
me, that's for me. I get a lot of enjoyment out of that, and I know not every author does, but for me, I just really love that. I love
You
that
like that
process.
challenge.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, any marketing tips?
Oh man,
Now that
marketing.
you did an independent self-published book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to build all your relationships, and you have to build them as sincerely as you can, and make sure that you're it's not just about buy my book. It's about, genuinely getting to know readers and librarians and booksellers, and because everybody's in it for the same thing. We're all in it for the love of books. And so just kind of remembering that, and kind of keeping that appreciation in there as you're reaching out to people, and not being afraid to reach out to people and ask. If you see a podcast like this and you want to be on it, just reach out and say, hey, I might be interested. And there's you always get a no to a question that you don't ask, right? So, but sometimes if you ask the question, the answer becomes yes.
Well, and I know for me, I think I've had one author tell me no, they couldn't do the podcast. Everybody else is like,
Of
"Yep,
course.
absolutely, I'd be love to be on."
Yeah,
So, and
yeah,
it goes both ways. And most authors are very forthcoming. If you go to a lot of author events, I know, I've Killer Nashville, I've done BoucherCon,
mhm,
really well known, like Lee Child's brother, Andrew Child, walked up to him, talked to him,
yeah,
great guy
yeah.
to talk to. They're all usually very willing to talk. So don't be
Absolutely.
afraid.
Right, right.
And if you're lucky enough, maybe that you can pick their brain a little bit too, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what events you got coming up?
So I got a lot of teaching coming up, actually. So, well, actually, before that, I am doing I'm doing a grown-up book fair, which is
Grown up
sponsored by
book.
a little book. It's a little bookstore called Second Star to the Right, and it's in Platt Park. But they do it at Fiction Beer Company, which is on Colfax. And so they kind of come over and they bring some of their books over, and they just have like a book fair, like we used to have when we were kids back at the library, except that there's beer and refreshments and everything. But I'm going to go be at their grown up book fair on April 27th, which is a Sunday. I think it's like late afternoon sometime. And then I've got some teaching. I'm teaching a couple of classes down at Douglas County Libraries, some writing classes down there. And I'm teaching at LitFest, which is Lighthouse Writers conference coming up in June. Teaching a couple there. And I'm also doing, the Colorado Sun does an event called Sun Fest. And that I think is May 16th. And they have they just do, it's like a 1 day thing. It's at DU, University of Denver. And they have different panels on various topics of interest in the Colorado and Denver community. And I'm going to be on a publishing and writing one, along with Andrea Dupree, who is the director of Lighthouse Writers, and Shauna Kelly, who has a lot of experience with publishing, and actually happens to be my developmental editor as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So
And do you usually go to BoucherCon?
yeah, I'm supposed to go to BoucherCon, so I think I'll probably be there. I'm scheduled to go. Are you going?
I don't think so. I'll be able to go this year. My wife's in the middle of a huge project, and she's been gone for 2 weeks in Utah. I'd really like to go because Michael Connelly's there, and I'd love to talk to Michael Connelly, pick his brain, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen this year. I did go last year because Killer Nashville and BoucherCon were both in Nashville 2 weeks apart,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, they were
or
right.
back-to-back weekends. So
Yeah.
I did that. I will be going to Killer Nashville, but yeah, we're hoping we would like to go to the one in Calgary. My wife really wants to go.
I want to go to
We're
that
going
one
to see
too.
what the world's going to be like crossing the border into,
Right.
with
Exactly.
everything going on. Now, hopefully things die down a little bit and it's not quite
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
precarious. But
We'll see. The last one that I was at was Minneapolis, which was in 2022, and that was a ton of fun. Really great.
yeah,
So yeah, so it's so I'm glad to, and like I said, I'm registered. I haven't bought a plane ticket yet. I just I got to kind of work out some logistics. It's not the greatest time of year for me to do it, but let's see if I can make it happen. I'm hoping to.
yeah. Well, it's not cheap either.
No, it's definitely not. It's an investment, but that's the thing. You go to those things because they are an investment in all kinds
Yeah.
of in relationships. Again, it goes back to relationships and
Oh, yeah.
inspiration, just being around people.
Yeah, I got to meet lots and lots of people. So,
Yeah.
so there's your website. So where else can people find you?
So I've been taking a little hiatus from Meta apps. So I technically have Facebook and Instagram accounts, but I'm not posting there much. I've been trying to get a little more active on Blue Sky. So I am on Blue Sky, and I have a Substack. And so my Substack is called the What If Journal. And it's kind of about, about what's going on with me, but also just about creativity in general and trying to offer some inspiration for any creative types who are out there. So definitely check that out. Those are probably the best places to find me these days.
And they can contact you through your website as well for any of the editing services and things you offer as well.
Yep. Find me on my website. Yeah.
And anything else you want to talk about? We're about an hour and 15 minutes. So
I know. Yeah. This has been an hour and 15 minutes has flown by. It really has.
usually does go pretty quickly. I don't know how so many people do these interviews. I've done a few radio interviews and they give you like 7 minutes. It's like, how do you talk about yourself in 7 minutes, right?
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, some of them are just like speed getting through it. So yeah.
Like I'm sorry, I need more time than that. Once I start talking, I can't stop sometimes.
Well, you obviously have devoted listeners who are going to hang out, so that's a good thing.
I have a few, and we'll see over time.
Yeah.
So, but I think we'll call it a night. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I enjoyed sitting next to you on the panel at Left Coast Crime and hearing what you had to say. That was a fun panel. We had a nice crowd. The last panel I did at Killer Nashville was on Sunday, and nobody was there because everybody's already leaving for their flights. So it was like the worst day to be on a panel. But we were there the first day. I think it was the Thursday, so it was really the first day and one of the first panels. So it was great, and there was a lot of people in the crowd and a lot of well-known faces as well. So, but. Appreciate you being on. I will send you a link and all that. If you want to wait backstage, we can talk afterwards. I'll say goodbye to everyone. But thank you, Cynthia. Best of luck.
Randy, and good night, everybody.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone, for being on tonight. Once again, check out my new book, if I can find it here. I'm still trying to figure out but there's my new book. Just came out. Come on. I didn't want to lock it. I didn't want to do that. Come on. There we go. Justice for the Forgotten. Please check it out. Getting great reviews. Another Colorado-based retired Westminster police officer and his canine. So hopefully you'll check that out. But thanks, everyone. Next week, it'll be Tuesday night. We'll have Jody Burnett on. So that'll be great. And she writes canine books as well. So we'll probably be talking about a lot of dogs. So thanks, everyone. Take care. We'll talk to you next week.